I have sat on this bench long enough to understand that disrespect does not always look the same. Sometimes it is loud and disruptive, impossible to ignore. Other times it arrives quietly, polished, composed, and certain it will not be questioned. It sits down before being asked, carries itself with ease, and behaves as though judgment is something reserved for other people. That is exactly what entered my courtroom the morning Dominic Ashford appeared before me. The case itself sounded simple on paper. Reckless endangerment, failure to render aid, and hit and run in a private parking garage. But paper has no pulse. It does not show you a 61-year-old woman pulling herself off cold concrete with a fractured wrist after a 12-hour shift. It does not show you a young man in an expensive blazer, sitting back casually, scrolling his phone as if the proceedings are happening around him, not to him. That is why judges must always look beyond paper. Dominic Ashford was 24. He walked in like someone accustomed to doors opening for him. He sat before being told, crossed his leg, and pulled out his phone. So my first words were not about evidence or charges. They were simple. Put the phone away. He did, but slowly, as though even basic compliance deserved recognition. I have seen every kind of confidence money can produce, but what stood out that day was not arrogance. It was the quiet certainty that the room would adjust to him. Then Patricia Aussie took the stand. She did not try to win sympathy, and that is why I believed her. She spoke plainly, carefully, like someone stating facts rather than telling a story. After a 12-hour shift caring for an elderly patient, she stopped at a grocery store and bought a few items with her own money because the patient's refrigerator was nearly empty. In the parking garage, she heard an engine, and then she was on the ground. Her groceries scattered, her wrist fractured. She looked up just in time to see the SUV continue driving away. Minutes later, while still on the floor, she saw a young man walk past her. He did not stop. He did not help. He simply walked away. While she spoke, I watched Dominic. He was no longer looking at his phone, but he was not looking at her either. His gaze hovered just above her head, the familiar way people pretend to listen without truly seeing someone. When she finished, I asked him if he was aware that someone had been injured. That was the first moment he truly engaged. He straightened and said, "I wasn't aware of any contact." There are visual challenges in that environment relevant to understanding my perception of events. It was a polished answer, too polished. Innocent people do not sound rehearsed. They say, "I didn't see her." They do not speak in prepared language. So I told him we would look at the footage. It was 44 seconds long, and it did not need to be longer. The SUV entered too fast, struck Patricia, and continued driving. Moments later, Dominic appeared and walked past her without stopping. There was no confusion, no ambiguity, just facts. His lawyer stepped in, speaking about lighting, camera angles, and perception, and then carefully introduced the weight of the Ashford family. Its influence, its contributions, its standing. I let him finish, and then I asked a simple question. "Is your father in the courtroom?" The room shifted. A glance toward the back gave the answer. Moments later, Richard Ashford stood. What he did next mattered more than anything else that day. He did not defend his son. He did not soften the truth. He said plainly that his son had hit a woman and walked away. He had seen the footage, and no explanation would change what was clearly visible. Then he turned to Patricia and apologized, not as a businessman, but as a father. Finally, he made it clear that his name, his wealth, and his influence should have no bearing on the outcome. At that point, the case became simple again. I returned to the facts: a hardworking woman, a careless driver, and a decision to walk away. I delivered the verdict, guilty on all counts. The sentence was not just about punishment, it was about responsibility. Full restitution, paid by Dominic himself. A 1-year suspension of his license. 240 hours of community service in elder care. And a handwritten apology, no lawyers, no polish, just truth. Months later, I received a report. He had not missed a single shift. At first, he had been polite but distant, completing tasks without connection. Then something changed. One day, instead of treating someone like a task, he treated them like a person. He stayed, listened, and showed patience. That was when the program director said he was beginning to understand. His apology letter reflected that change. It contained no excuses, no technical language, just accountability. He admitted what he had done, acknowledged the harm, and wrote that he would never again allow his own urgency to blind him to someone else's need. That is what people often misunderstand about justice. It is not about humiliation or revenge. It is about clarity, what happened, who is responsible, and what comes next. That day, 3 people reminded me how justice truly works. Patricia, by showing up and telling the truth. Richard Ashford, by refusing to shield his son. And Dominic, by eventually choosing to change. People often ask whether moments like this restore my faith in the system. They do not. People do. Because systems do not make choices, people do. And sometimes, change does not come in dramatic gestures. Sometimes, it begins quietly, like a young man sitting in his car for 11 minutes before finally stepping out and walking inside.